we're going to jump right in. I'm going to share my screen so you can see the introduction, and we're going to get rolling. Welcome to another episode of Ring Them Bells. We continue our deep dive into the Divine Council worldview with another expert scholar. Today we welcome to the show Dr. Ronn Johnson. Ronn received his Ph.D. from Dallas Theological Seminary. Ronn has taught Bible and theology courses at the college level for over 20 years. Ronn has pastored 2 churches in the Minneapolis area for 15 years and regularly hosts study trips to Israel. Ronn is an instructor at the late Dr. Heiser's Awakening School of Theology. He is also one of the hosts of the popular Divine Council Worldview podcast. Buckle up and get ready for an incredible discussion that is sure to lead us into the unseen realm. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show with me, Dr. Ronn Johnson. All right. You know what's funny is it took me like 3 takes to do that because I couldn't say the city Minneapolis. Minneapolis.
You didn't get it yet.
It's so funny that I don't know why that city throws me for a loop. But welcome to the show, sir. We are a big fan of yours here at Ring Them Bells. From myself and all of our audience, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Sure. You're very welcome. Glad to be here.
Yeah. Well, let's dive right in. All right, Ron, if you're ready, I want to take a trip down memory lane and at the same time dive right into the Divine Council worldview. So reading your bio, I was super interested in your dissertation paper on the subject of the Old Testament background for Paul's principalities and powers. Tell us about this paper and how it shows the Divine Council worldview is not just connected to the Hebrew scriptures, but to the entire Bible.
Yeah. So we, Mike Heiser and I go back, to college days. So 40 some years ago, became good friends, fast friends, in fact. And we went off to seminary after college together, taught together. So when it came time for both of us to get into our PhD dissertation stages, we found ourselves kind of at the same time, but different schools. He was at Madison, me at Dallas. He started writing on, unbeknownst to me, he had not talked to me for a couple of months about his subject matter, and that is the Divine Council and Second Temple Judaism. So I was thoroughly entrenched in getting my dissertation topic approved, which I did, which I hated, by the way, is the aphorisms of Paul, and got into rhetorical criticism and stuff. I just hated it, but you got to do it. Anyway, so he said, or he was coming through town up to St. Paul and where I lived, and we went out to coffee to a cafe in St. Paul. He took out a napkin and started drawing on the napkin this concept of other gods. And I stopped him, and I've told the story, my aha moment for me, as opposed to his when he was sitting in Sunday school, if you ever heard that story.
Mm-hmm.
And someone told him to translate Psalm 82 in Hebrew. For me, it was sitting at a coffee shop, and he started drawing on this napkin as though the gods of the first commandment were real spirits. And I stopped him and I said, are you saying that if I asked Moses, are these gods real, that he would say yes? I was really perplexed, because I knew the dominoes would have to start tipping in all sorts of ways if that was true, right? And in classic Mike fashion, he said, no, I'm saying that if you asked the question, he'd be surprised at the question. He would be amazed that you didn't think they were real. So he was writing on that. I was writing on mine. Then when we started talking about this, I was wondering, in the back of my mind, I wonder if any evangelicals have taken the view. And then we had another lunch with another friend in Madison at a buffet. And so again, you can always remember where you were when these kind of things happen.
Yeah.
We're sitting at a buffet in Madison, me, Mike, Roger Black, and Doug Vardell. And Roger was very instrumental in Mike's thinking at Madison. And Roger just made a comment between two bites of food that the principalities and powers of Paul were the gods of the Old Testament. And again, my mind just went kapoosh, like, oh, brother, if that's true, then this, and this. So I drove home that night, got in the car at about midnight, drove home, and got home up in Minneapolis. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, my wife found me downstairs in the office typing a dissertation proposal change. I already had my dissertation approved, which is a huge step. And she bawled. She broke into tears. And she said, don't do this to me. You're not going to change. And I said, can you just give me this one chance? Because what I typed out was a proposal that the gods of the first commandment were the principalities and powers of Paul. And after a couple of weeks of finagling with that, and you see, you always have to demonstrate that nobody has studied something before. That's always how a dissertation works. So I just went through as fast as I could to demonstrate, with the help of our librarian at the college where I was, that no evangelical author had ever tackled this concept on a major level, and that is, are the principalities and powers of Paul the same beings of the Old Testament as the first commandment deities? No one had ever done that. I was surprised. And so I got that in, got it approved, and that was the start of just, I mean, I flew through that dissertation so fast. I loved every minute of it because I was doing it with Mike at that point. We were talking, emailing, phone calls,
Wow.
meetings. He was writing on his, I was writing on mine. His was mainly Old Testament, mine was mainly New, but just the amount of overlap was just fantastic. And so we paralleled that story beautifully for each other. And is that enough? That was the background. And it came because of those little, and again, I would propose that we all have this as Bible students. We have those moments where we realize when someone says something and we make a connection in our head, like, well, if that's true, then da 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 da, and we see all those things that depend on that idea and how it would ricochet and bounce through the entire Bible, adjusting so much of what we had been presuming. So that's what fascinated me about the topic. And I got it done. And I remember going to a conference the next year, and my reader, I had 3 readers at Dallas Seminary, and the first reader, we met and talked, and he congratulated me on finishing, that kind of story. And we talked a little bit, and I remember walking away thinking, I don't think he knows what I even argued for in that paper, because they're so concerned about the bark on the tree. I don't sense they see the forest sometimes,
Yeah.
dissertation reader. They're looking at every semicolon and footnote. And again, my argument was that the gods of the Old Testament are real spirits. They're as alive and well as Yahweh, and they are in true competition for my worship. And they come into the New Testament not as theoi or theoses, as we say, or theoi plural, but as what Paul would call rulers and authorities, and that he saw in those beings much more than angels. And what I argue for in the dissertation, by the way, is that the word angel is basically an unusable term because we have so impacted it, or what's the word I want there?
Overloaded it.
Overloaded it with medieval, wings and just kind of a wishy-washy version of a spiritual being, when an angel just means a messenger, right? In Old Testament or New Testament thinking. So a messenger what? We always should be asking ourselves, instead of the word angel, we should just say messenger, and then think messenger what? Messenger deity? And if so, that sheds whole new light on what a Gabriel and a Michael would be. Gabriel never calls himself an angel. When in Luke 1 they ask him who he is, he says, I come from the presence of God. So I think if you had said, are you an angel? He'd be, what's that? That would have been because again, it's a transliterated word. We take the word angelos and just transliterate the letters over because we don't know what it is in original Wycliffian English.
Yeah, that's so cool.
But that's the story.
So when you were bringing that over to the New Testament, because it seems like that was like a big first step of what you were doing with this concept, was, with the originality that you were talking about with your dissertation, was connecting that, bridging that gap into the New Testament. And I say gap, that's a proposed modern Western thing that we think there's a gap. But you showed how there was that connection there. Any insights from that you brought over?
Yeah, when Jesus in Mark 1 comes out of the wilderness having defeated Satan, the demons start talking as though they are the gods of the Old Testament. The demon Mark 1 says, did you come to destroy us? And he uses the same Greek word used in Jeremiah 10:11, that the gods would be destroyed. So in other words, what I found in my own personal, well, I guess study, or what I found myself recommending through the study, let's put it that way, is that everything about the gods of the Old Testament is true about the demonia, or the principalities and powers that Paul meets later, or Paul talks about, in that they are given power, they are expected to be in positions of leadership, even a geographical leadership over nations and portions of the world. And that when Jesus meets them, they start like when the lights come on and the cockroaches flee, all of a sudden you start meeting these beings that are probably active throughout the intertestamental period, but they're just not talking because they're simply doing their job.
Mm.
So a demonized person to me is not frothing at the mouth and tearing chains on a normal level. He's sitting like Mark 1, he's sitting in a synagogue. He's a normal guy, a normal businessman, and he's doing his duty to keep people, in that case, it seems in Mark 1, from finding Yahweh. That's his concern. So when Jesus walks into the synagogue and that being notices who he is, all heck breaks loose at that moment. And I think it's because Jesus is on the scene, and now you have that confrontation for the first time of the gods of the Old Testament and the actual Messiah of the New Testament meeting. And then Mark 3:11 I find great, where it says every time Jesus met a demon, they got down on their hands and knees and worshiped him. It's as though he made his point to that demon in Mark 1, and having defeated Satan in Matthew 4 and Luke 4, that the and by the way, that's how I take I saw Satan fall from heaven, or fall like lightning. It's Luke 10. The word fall there is just prostrate, to fall down. So I think
Wow.
what he's saying is that I saw Satan get down in front of me like lightning. Boom, down he went. In other words, he lost that day. And that's why in the next verse or two, Jesus then says, you have my authority now to go out and cast out demons. So I take that moment to be the Jeremiah 10, Isaiah 21, Zephaniah 2 kind of moment, where the promise of Elohim destruction came true in the life of Jesus there in the first year of his ministry. And he spent the next 3 years then preparing the disciples for his death, which is, again, an amazing thing, another discussion, but how that's going to work out. And then see what else? I'll leave it there unless you have more
Yeah.
questions, but
No,
I'm
I
sure
think
you do. But
no, that's great. I think that we're going to unpack a lot of that because that was so much, and that's what this does when the divine council worldview sinks in. It unlocks so many different connections, Hebrew scriptures and the life and teachings of Jesus. And we're going to unpack a lot of what you said through our discussion following here. But one thing that I want to mention when you said angels, because I do agree with you with the word angels and even angels and demons, we lose, the waters are so muddy with those words.
right.
And it's just like Mike said, it's like the white hats and the black hats, the good guys and the bad guys, and then you try to lump everything there, but there's a lot more diversity within the spiritual realm and dividing what these spiritual forces are. And just like with that word angelos or angels, another word to me, and we don't have to go into the specifics of it with hell, but the word hell throughout the entire Bible is like, it's painted on so many different words and so many different concepts that it's lost on what, like, to a typical reader picking up the Bible in a pew. It just seems like we could do so much better, and without trying to say which one of the three different conditionalism, universal, whatever you want to say, leave that debate aside. From an interpretational standpoint, both the word angels and even the word hell, like we can do better.
Yeah. Oh, boy, this just reminds me of so many times when, as a preacher or a pastor, you knew if you were to say something in a room, you'd cause trouble, and sometimes you would just go with the flow and not bring it up. But this is back in 2009-ish or so. The NIV was going through an update, the new NIV, today's NIV, something like that. And they put out a call at ETS that if you wanted to make a recommended reading to the general editor of the NIV update committee, you had a better read on a certain passage or something, you could get 10 minutes with him in a hotel suite. And so I got my list together, and I got my 10 minutes, and I gave him a list of 10 or 19 places where the word Elohim or Theos, no, it's just Old Testament, I think it was, where the word Elohim should be translated GODS, small GODS, instead of capital GOD. And not one of the readings got in. I looked, but and again, I had textual reasons for each one of them, saying that if we want to be honest, the text is talking about plural deities here. But I knew, and I think he did too, but if you throw plural deities into a Bible unannounced, the person in the pew is going to have trouble. So how to democratize the divine council worldview is my great hope in the next how many ever years I have. now that Mike is gone, and I miss him every day, because this is exactly the kind of conversation he would be championing, is we need to take this concept of plural deities and not weird it out, not go. And it's easily thought to be weird by the average Bible study person that you bring it up to, but it's not a weird idea to them. And so what I would love to see again, when we're dead and gone, 100 years from now, that this divine council worldview idea, however we want to flesh that out, is the normal read on the Bible. That's my big hope. Obviously, that's huge, but that would be, forget all of our names. Let's not worry about that. But a read on the Bible that has a divine council worldview concept behind it, which really just is a divine plurality idea to me. You don't have to even harp on the word council that much. I would just go with plural Elohim and go from there. But that gets into the discussion we'll have tonight. So
Yeah, and that's it's what this channel stands for, is helping people rediscover the supernatural focus of the Bible. And that's what you and Mike have done so well. So as we continue down memory lane, I wanted to share a couple of memorable pictures of you and Heiser from some important moments, and have you add some context for myself and my audience.
Well, this would be new. I've not seen these.
Yeah. So how's that sound?
Sounds good.
Let's do it. So awesome. I'm going to share my screen, and let's you and the audience see these significant moments with Heiser. Some great context for my audience to understand of the value and weight that you hold hosting the Divine Council Worldview podcast, Ron, is to understand, like you've been telling us, how far back into this ministry you go. I thought it would be impactful for you to share your journey through these first two Naked Bible conferences with us. So I'm going to have those two pictures that we just saw of each of the conference on our screen here for my audience to see. But Ron, can you walk us through that first Naked Bible conference where we have this awesome picture of both you and Heiser with your wives? That first event was hosted in Dallas and had over 300 attendees. Tell us what you remember and why it was so special.
Yeah, Mike put that together just out of recommendations coming from all sides. Hey, Mike, where can I come to talk to you and those who are like-minded? So he didn't think it would be as popular as it was, but he put out a call for a conference, and down there in Dallas we met, and 300 some. I didn't speak at that one. I just came to enjoy, the fellowship. I got to see some of the faces of the people that I'd met through emails and just discussions in the blogs I had written for Mike by that point. Yeah, by that point, Mike had asked me to participate on the blog site, so I had put out numerous things there. So it was fun to meet people and talk about that. The picture there is Drina is Mike's wife there, and Susan's my wife. We were married again a year apart, 36 years ago at that point, and so we were good friends. Their children were born about the same time ours were, and so Drina and Susan are very close friends. And I remember when Mike died. In fact, Susan got the text from Drina and just crumpled on the kitchen floor. I'll never forget that. And we are, like I say, one of my best friends in the world, and so Mike, yeah, I'll leave it there. That was the 2018?
Yeah, 2018
conference. So
thanks for sharing that. And the next picture is mind blowing to me. Seeing you, Heiser, Tim Mackey, Carmen Imes all on stage together is just so cool. I have to be honest, seeing that image made me a little jealous. I wanted to be there when I saw it, and I'm hoping I can find the video of that moment. I haven't found it yet, and I'd love to get it out there to share. But tell me about that specific conference. Like I said, Carmen was there as well, and she shared that was such an impactful moment for her. And I wondered if you could tell us about that image that we have here of you guys on stage and what that conference was like.
Yeah, that was so fun to share the microphone with like-minded guys and gals like Carmen and why am I forgetting? Tim. Yeah, Tim Mackey.
Yeah.
And David. Sitting to my right is Dave, and why am I forgetting his last name? And so just a good fellowship on and off stage. What was fun is that Mike just asked us to each present a paper that we were thinking about that had a Divine Council theme to it, and so I took the tack, and Mike knew I was coming with this, of a version of atonement that I was recommending on the blog of his, the Naked Bible blog. So that was my paper, and it was just fun to take questions from the audience. And the biggest thing was, again, rubbing shoulders with people who I had heard of or talked to on emails and such, and realizing we're all there for the same reason, just to get to understand this worldview more consistently, and being able to ask questions of each other, kind of round off the rough edges if we have them. Because at this point, think of it, 2019, Mike had just put out Unseen Realm probably 3-4 years earlier, so people were just coming into really understanding the impact of that book, his bestseller. And so it's too bad we had another one scheduled, right, 2020, and then COVID took over, and we haven't had one since. Because after then COVID, then Mike got ill. So Drina would like to do it again, and it's in the works. It's far enough down the way that I haven't given any thought to it, but Mike or Drina does want to do another one. So it would take a lot of planning, and frankly, not having Mike as the moderator would be difficult, because he is such a lightning rod for this discussion. So we'll see if it ever pans out again. But
Yeah, that's cool to hear, because that was actually one of my follow-ups to see if anything was thought about in the future. Because, yeah, just those moments, I think, are why Heiser was so great. He didn't follow the normal path for scholars and how they do things. And like you said, I think you used the word democratize the divine counsel worldview out into the masses, into the people in the pew. That was his focus for what he was doing. And these events, even that first one, I know it had to be a step of bravery to do something like that, put himself out there, and him and Drina. So I salute you guys for that, and I can't wait for the next one. I'm going to be there for sure. So Ron, my channel is known for sharing informative clips from Heiser about the divine counsel worldview during interviews to help to add to the discussion. But I wanted to mix it up today with our interview and only show clips of other scholars who are expanding on Heiser's work. It's been refreshing for me to discover that Heiser was just the tip of the iceberg when it came to rediscovering the supernatural focus of our Bibles. There are many actively involved in this great awakening in the evangelical community to return to the original supernatural context of Scripture. And I'm excited to see so many people keeping Mike's name and work alive. Because when I first was coming into this world, I was like, wow, I felt alone, right? I was like, like this is, I'm the only person sharing this or being a part of this or whatever. But then when I came in, I'm like, oh, wow, like, Matthew Halstead, Tim Mackey, tons of different resources and people that I could share. We're going to look at even Andrew Teeter, this other guy that's a Harvard professor that, citing Heiser's work. And there's so many people that are a part of what I feel like what you're saying is happening to this evangelical mindset that needed shifting. And it's not something that's coming from a movement in the 50s, like you're saying. This is coming from a foundational ancient Near Eastern concept within the context of Scripture that's always been there. And like what I want to hear from you is, what do you see with this multitude of voices and kind of this great awakening? Do you see the same as I do, that there's more voices to this than ever?
I do, and I thank you. I'm always nervous that, like Mike's reputation, sometimes I get the opinion that people saw Mike as an outsider, even to the academic establishment, shall we say, so that he wasn't a Harvard professor. He was at Logos, so he was attacking this issue not from where normal people do, shall we say, which that's not Mike's fault, but what also people have often found Mike. Have you noticed this? People have found Mike through alien stuff and UFO stuff and stuff where they're Bible believing people, and they're reading or they find Mike through a website or a web a YouTube or something, where he's talking sensibly for the first time in their mind about aliens, let's say. And so then they look him up on something else, and what do you know? He's a good old Bible believing, inspiration believing evangelical. And that's what surprised people. And that's why he caught on so well. And again, he deserved it so much. where again, he's at ETS, I'm at ETS. We're kind of rubbing shoulders with the professors that make up the guild, and Mike was always about kind of pushing the envelope when it came to the guild, right? Because he was frustrated that uh, like a ball going downhill, inertia has its ways even theologically. And if it's not hot, like a hot topic, it ain't going to go anywhere. So let's say back in 2000 or the mid 1990s, it was, does God know the future? Greg Boyd, John Piper, that was the thing for a couple of years. Then in 2004 through 6 or 7 or 8, it was righteousness, and it was Piper versus Wright. And you have these big balls of inertia rolling down the evangelical world, and they pick up steam, and it kind of runs the show. It gets on the front of Christianity today. My hope would be, and this is again where I was going with this, that the divine counsel worldview, or whatever you want to call that thing that we're talking about, I wish it would get on the front cover of CT because of not just what Mike did for us, but what it should mean to the Bible believing world, and I hate to see it relegated to the weird stuff, right? And often people, well, this as much as anybody, this is what I always hear. I want to have a Sunday school class at church and talk about this book, but my pastor won't let me because he thinks it's weird. And you just sigh and go, well, no, that's not the point. I know that Nephilim will be a topic and people are going to go, what, and think that's weird. But I wish we could move it past that and say, no, it's not just that. It's the entire story of Scripture. Once you make the gods real, every page of the Bible has a story or a narrative or a discussion about which Elohim does this and which Elohim should I trust. Is this Elohim for Yahweh or against him? I mean, it becomes a very colored, layered discussion instead of the black and white that we're so used to. So
I think that's perfect, because what it shows is that we do need a multitude of voices for that to get on there, and I think that's what's happening, and I think that's what I'm seeing, because we're going to share a clip here from Andrew Teeter, and he's a Harvard professor who spoke at a Hebrew Bible conference. And I went there personally. It was an amazing experience in Multnomah. And he quoted him in this talk. And I see so many other different voices and people to where this is becoming more streamlined. And I didn't have any clips today to share with you, but I have so much that I'm working through right now from Tucker Carlson, Joe Rogan, Russell Brand. And these are very popular podcaster, big name voices. But I'm telling you, Ron, the divine counsel worldview, that type of thinking, they're saying it. I could share 3 or 4 clips to you from Tucker Carlson that these people that are they're admittedly secular from different parts of the world. The good news and gospel and this supernatural focus, this divine counsel worldview, when they're discovering Christianity, it's at the forefront of what they're discovering. And that's what I see. And I just think it's so beautiful. And whether, any of them have everything figured out, just like none of us have everything figured out, that's not the point. But the point is that this is what's being talked about. And I champion your mindset for what you want and what you're shooting for it to get on the front cover. And that's what we're going to help do at Ring Them Bells, and starting with this clip. So like I said, I was at that Hebrew Bible conference. Dr. Carmen Imes spoke on it. It was a life-changing event. There were so many awesome speakers there. And this one we're going to share is from Andrew Teeter. And we're going to check out this clip from his talk entitled The World Scene, Structure, Worldview, and the Poetics of Genesis 1. Let's check this out.
The world scene within Genesis 1, the world as seen there, is a world seen multiply, in a manifold manner. So my claim is that attending to this multiplicity of perspectives is key to understanding the vision of the world that this text embodies, the worldview that it renders tangible. That there is a deep correspondence between the celestial and the terrestrial realms, the seen and the unseen, between the hosts of heaven and the hosts of earth. And this correspondence points to hints at, begins to disclose the multifaceted realities of what Michael Heiser would often refer to as the divine council worldview. Members of the divine council fall in a like manner to humanity in Genesis 6. The same correspondence underpins the notion of celestial patronage from its classic articulation in Deuteronomy 32, where the nations are divided, quote, according to the number of the sons of God, to the book of Daniel, where Yahweh's angel battles the prince of Persia and anticipates the coming of the prince of Greece, and with many other reflexes throughout Genesis through 2 Kings, especially regarding mysterious encounters with angelic beings on borderlines. And it also anticipates the significance of the Anakim, the giants, in the conquest of the land, as well as the continuation of that theme in Samuel through Goliath and then through the defeat of the various giants of David's mighty men, and so forth. Indeed, the relationship between the sons of God, the celestial hosts, and humanity is a recurrent one throughout the Hebrew Bible. This is the conceptual world of Psalm 82 and of Isaiah 24, where we read, "In that day the Lord will punish the host of heaven in the heavens, and the kings of the earth upon the earth. And then the moon will be ashamed, and the sun will be abashed. And the Lord of hosts is going to reign on Mount Zion in Jerusalem, and his presence will be revealed to the elders." All of this is not even to mention the fascinating and extraordinarily robust legacy of these ideas in Second Temple Judaism, in Qumran, and in the New Testament. This intuition, for example, clearly underlies Jesus' instruction to pray for the coming of God's kingdom on earth as in heaven. Indeed, the world scene in Genesis 1 is itself a contemplative matrix for thinking about the nature of reality, of time, of the relationship between what's above and what's below, what's before and what's after, and especially in its position at the beginning and head of all. It prepares one to contemplate the predictive rhythms of history and the mystery of time and the divine plan for the ages that will follow. The world, that is, both seen and unseen.
Wow. That is amazing.
That's neat.
Yeah,
That's a nice piece of reading, yeah.
Yeah, I tell you, if Dr. Seuss was the most intelligent Bible scholar in the entire world, I think that that would be it, because he has such a a lingual superiority that he's just like popping not only like intelligent words, but they're almost in rhyme. It sounds like for some of what he's
beautiful.
saying. So to that point, that entire talk is incredible, but also mind-numbingly fast and intelligent. But I love how this clip illustrates their creation account in Genesis 1 shows the connectedness of the seen and unseen realms in the minds of the Hebrew authors. How we have God dividing up rulership and authority to both humans here on earth and to spiritual celestial beings in the heavens, and how this illustrates that they saw these two worlds overlapping and intimately connected. Before I say anything else, tell me your thoughts on that and that clip.
Yeah, and thank you. That interconnectedness is such a part of the early narrative of Genesis, especially, well, 3 we know where they're in a garden together, and the pair wants to hide from Yahweh. That's so weird. It's hard even to imagine. Genesis 6, the sons of God having relations with human women. Again, odd to us. It was not odd to them. That was just part of their world, because apparently this happens again. It says in 6:4, and I take that to be the genocide of Joshua. And as the speaker was mentioning, this just travels all the way through the Old Testament into the demonic possessions of the New. I was thinking as he was talking again about, and I was just getting into this in the Divine Council Worldview podcast that I host with Mike Chu. We're starting where we just finished recording one on Genesis 28, where Jacob puts a stone down and sees a ladder, or most people think it's a stairway, the side of a ziggurat that would be built, much like in Genesis 11. The Tower of Babel concept is to build a tall tower that can have a stairway, so that the gods can be invited down to their temple, or we can go up to the top and do sacrifices to the gods of the heavens. So that idea of a ziggurat, which is not just in Mesopotamia, but we've found, off the coast of Japan, submerged ones. We've found them, of course, in Mexico and South America. And this idea that, and it's about 2200 BC or so. If there's I was just reading and again, I put this on my podcast, the secular book, don't know much about history, the secular writer is talking about this knowledge explosion of 2200. Again, who he has no care about the Bible. He's just talking about this idea that around 2200 BC, there seems to be this worldwide explosion of knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, agriculture. And again, the Bible reader is winking because he's thinking, well, that's what I just read in Genesis 11.
Yeah.
It fits. And then to find out that it's going worldwide, I sense that the story coming out of Genesis 11, which of course pushes us into the call of Abraham, is a world that thought in terms of our world is down here, and that world of spirits is not far above us. It's just right above the horizon. And we're going to invite them down as a regular occurrence. And again, that Genesis 28 latter vision of Jacob, he even says at the end of the chapter, this is the gate of heaven. And I think the writer of Genesis wants us to believe that Jacob believed that he was on a spot called Bethel later, that was actually a portal of some kind, that these beings go up and down and do their bidding. And again, this seems to be following into the story of David in First Chronicles 21, where the fire comes down on an altar that David makes, and he calls this. Does he have a name for it? I forget if he gives it a name, but that's where he decides to put the tabernacle. David's tabernacle is in Jerusalem at that point. So this idea of, and we could riff on this for a while, but this idea that the divine and human worlds somehow collide at various places and at various times is so normal to the biblical writer and reader, as opposed to how we think today. That's the difficulty that we have in reading our Bibles. We're entering a world that this weird stuff to them is not weird. And yeah, that's all I need to say about that.
Hey, Mike, real quick, you froze. So we had a little bit of technical difficulties there, but we got the audio in, so everybody got to hear that. And I love what you were saying there. And I think Teeter, who we just shared, was echoing that. And I love how he brought up the Lord's Prayer. I see the Lord's Prayer as Jesus's daily instruction to remind ourselves of both of the connection and disconnection of heaven and earth. Like when Jesus instructs us to pray, "Our Father who is in heaven." I think that's the first part of the prayer. He wants us to realize our Father is in heaven. That separation in a sense. And then also, let your kingdom come here on earth as it is in heaven, or deliver us from evil or the evil one, and so on. These instructive words show both the separation of heaven from earth and the interconnectedness of our Father's his desire to fully dwell here on earth as he is in heaven. So any thoughts on that?
I've often, and my wife disagrees with me on this, so look out. When I say that heaven is it's not a direction, or it's not a place as much as a direction in the Bible. So in other words, there's no place left of Neptune called heaven, right? It's in Hebrew, it's a plural term. And so much like water, it's a concept, it doesn't have to have a direction. So I like your point that when we pray to the Father, and I've gotten into the habit of this over the years, sometimes I pray up, sometimes I pray down, sometimes I pray to my left, because I want to get in the habit of thinking it's not up that he is, because that would be a symbolic way of thinking of the heavens. It's up, right? But I think what God is interdimensional or non-dimensional. When I'm thinking of the heavens, I always try to get myself out of the habit of thinking directionally, because otherwise to the Chinaman, he's down, right? He's not left of Neptune. So I think we will be fascinated someday when all this is over and we enter the next world and find out how close heaven was to us, literally, even parallel to us somehow.
Yeah.
So
there's a lot of in a lot of the movies, but especially Marvel right now, is like this multiverse concept. And so interdimensionality is something that for the modern world we can kind of like grasp right now. And I think that, like you're saying, instead of like thinking of heaven as a direction or a place up, it's better to look at it like that, like God's space. And God's space is interconnected with our space and fully desiring to dwell with our space. And nowhere do we have a better picture of that than the person of Jesus. So let's move on to our next clip, because we're highlighting how there's so many different voices that are pointing to this divine council worldview and to the work of Heiser. We just had that with Andrew Teeter from the Hebrew Bible Conference, which we're going to have more on in an upcoming series. And next, let's move on to this amazing clip from the Bible Project and their video series over spiritual beings, going over the Satan and demons. And this one outlines perfectly the 3 rebellions in Genesis. Let's cut right over there.
In Genesis 3, we meet a creature who's in a state of rebellion against his creator. We're not told yet why or how he rebels, but he's on a mission to ruin God's good world for other creatures.
This thing is trouble.
Yeah, this creature is the Bible's first portrait of evil. It distorts what God has purposed for good, ruining and dragging creation back into darkness and disorder.
So the humans join the spiritual rebel, which leads them back into chaos and death.
And from this point on, the human rebellion is interwoven with a spiritual rebellion. Well, the biblical authors offer subtle clues where this being is at work behind the scenes, animating division and hatred between humans. So remember the concept of God's heavenly staff team, the divine council, or the sons of God. In the Hebrew scriptures, we're told that some of these rebelled too. After the snake comes the rebellion of the sons of God in Genesis 6. We're told that they have sex with women who then give birth to violent warrior giants. The ancient kingdoms around Israel claimed to be founded and protected by giant warrior kings who were part human, part God, and filled with divine wisdom.
Ah, I see. So the biblical authors are saying, hey, those warrior kings, they shouldn't be honored.
Right. In this story, they're portrayed as human rebels who are captive to spiritual evil, spreading their violence in God's good world.
Yeah, and one of those kings in Genesis 10 goes on to build the city of Babylon.
Yes, Nimrod, whose name sounds like the Hebrew word for rebel. And his kingdom leads to the next rebellion, where humans exalt themselves in Babylon.
But God scatters that rebellion.
And when Moses in Deuteronomy looks back at that story, he says that's the moment when God handed over the nations to worship the rebel host of heaven, the gods of money, sex, and military power. Moses is the first one to call them demons, that is, lesser spiritual beings.
So demons are spiritual forces at work behind corrupt human power structures. This is why when Jesus arrives on the scene, he said his primary enemy is not human.
Right. Jesus and his first followers viewed all the pain and suffering in God's good world as a sign of its captivity to death and spiritual evil.
But they didn't think this was the end of the story.
Right. Jesus knew that the only way out of this cosmic ruin is to overcome evil and death itself, even if it costs him everything.
Hallelujah. Okay. So first, little side note for everybody, Heiser was a major contributor to that entire spiritual being series for Bible Project. A lot of B's there. Sorry, I couldn't say that right. But Heiser was a part of all that. He's listed in the notes, and he even did a podcast with them during it. But I love how that clip efficiently outlines some pretty significant moments in the narrative for understanding the divine council worldview. Tell me your thoughts on that clip.
Yeah, thank you. I love and appreciate what Tim's doing and applaud it so much. We need good art as well as good text, and he's putting it together on both sides. So my only pushback is gentle but honest, and that is there's so much we don't know. And sometimes, again, if we're going to democratize this view to be something that we all, shall we say, believe in and push forward, there are some of those parts there that he'll recommend that this was a rebellion in Genesis 6 or something, and I'll say to myself, well, it doesn't say that, especially, specifically a rebellion, but I understand his point. So like Mike Heiser had 3 rebellions. He was known for that kind of a teaching. Genesis 3, 6, and 11 were his 3 rebellions. My pushback again is gentle, but I would just say we don't know they were official rebellions. There might have been 10 rebellions. We just don't know how specific this is in the divine world. Again, none of us have been able to look up above the horizon and see what's going on up there. So that's the only, again, recommendation that I follow for myself is I don't use the word rebellion in Genesis 3 for the humans. In other words, I don't see, again, this is just personal, okay?
Yeah,
I'll
go.
just give
I
you my
love
personal
this.
view.
Yes.
I don't see Adam and Eve rebelling at all. I just see them making a mistake. They were deceived and they got kicked out of the garden. But I see them as still righteous people who loved Yahweh, and they didn't have to get saved the next day. Again, how much I remember being taught in college that they got unsaved after Genesis 3, and then they got saved in Genesis 4. And I just remember thinking, how do you know that? So my personal call on this is simply that the story shows that you have a couple that's told that if they eat this fruit, they will die. And that's what happens. They chose to eat the fruit. They're kicked out of the garden. Thus, they're going to join a world of death, decay, and dying. And they do. But my guess would be is that Adam and Eve lived faithful lives from then on, and there was no, quote, rebellion. So it's those kind of minor little, I don't call it a tweak, and I certainly don't disagree with Bible Project on a general call, because I appreciate their work so much. But I'm just making a general push toward, in my own mind, emphasizing what we still don't know about the divine world and what they were thinking at certain points in the narrative.
Yeah, I think that's wise, and I think Tim and the Bible Project would agree, because ultimately, even as we look when we use the word rebellion, because I agree with you. I see the humans making a mistake, and we're going to talk about this later. But so much of my evangelical journey was focused on hearing about, the only problem was the fall, and that's about the humanity's sin problem, and that's where I have my sin problem. And that's all I heard from, like,
Right.
if you want to say rebellions or what took place in Genesis. And to get this context of when I look at it through Mike's lens of the three rebellions, it's more focused on the divine rebellion of, when we take it in the second temple literature context of Enoch and all these other writings for how they perceived this to be, is that, that they saw these gods coming down and inflicting a lot of chaos and pain upon humanity. And that's what God is on a rescue mission for. It's like, if I have a kid, I have 3 children. If I'm going to set them down in a garden, I don't want to set them down in a garden with a snake. You know what I mean? If a snake's out front, I'm going to try to lead them away from that snake. And that's what I see God's rescue mission is. And what you said about the garden, I'll say this one last thing and let you talk, is that, God doesn't curse the man or the woman. He curses the ground. Right. He curses the snake. But he doesn't curse them. And, immediately he puts this prophecy out through the woman that he's going to, produce through her seed something that will crush the head of the snake. And that's the motion of rescue that comes out from that. So before I say another word, thoughts on that?
Yeah, 2 other things that come to mind throughout this conversation here is it gets into the I don't know stuff, is what if some of the sons of gods were not rebellious? Is it possible that a Gabriel or a Michael can be duplicated and multiplied throughout the heavenly host? And that, obviously we have a mess that ensues after Genesis 11, but I look at Acts 17 and Galatians 4, verse 2 to about 7, where Paul seems to be recommending that the gods were put in charge for a reason that could be good too, that they could draw people to Yahweh. So I push this idea, and at least I test drive this idea in my own head. Genesis 11 does have gods being given, as the New Testament calls them, principalities and powers. They're authorities and they're rulers over geographic areas. That's true. And that's the problem that the solution then of Genesis 12 attacks. Genesis 12 is not about sin management. It's about worship. Which deity are you going to worship in a world of many competitors? So that to me is a bigger question than just sin and rebellion. I see the problem of worship being, front and center by the time you get to Genesis 12. The other thing that I often test drive is, and Psalm 82 gives me this impetus, is it possible that many humans are innocent bystanders of a cosmic war? And that, because I've had a lot of good friends, you I'm sure have too, that are good people, but they're not Christians. And you wonder, how do they fit into this war? Because we are given in our evangelical background this sense of you're either for God or against him, you're good or bad, you're black hat, white hat. But what if there is such a real thing as Psalm 82 about 6, where it says that, the world is, how does that go? They are unstable. They walk around in darkness. I'm paraphrasing Psalm 82 there, where it seems to be saying that the human side of this cosmic war can sometimes be just an innocent bystander. And I have wondered about that. We don't have a lot of evangelical teaching on that because, again, we have a Genesis 3 fall and Adamic guilt that just clouds the whole story. So anyway, I just throw it out there as another option that has not been thought through from an evangelical model. So.
Yeah, I think that's important to keep in mind. I'm working on this Heiser documentary, and I'm doing some just interviews on the side, interviewing fans and other people to just get context and kind of understand their thoughts on the Heiser and his work, just so I can, have some different ideas. And I interviewed somebody from my church who I found out is a huge fan of Heiser. And I asked her, just like questions that she still has. And man, her words were piercing to me because it's the exact things that I wrestle with and that I consistently ask to scholars and people that come on here, is parsing out the reality of evil out of all of this. Is understanding what that means. Like what you said, these innocent bystanders. We have people to know that, like, they're, even in the Gospels, we have children that were sitting there being thrown to the ground and into the flames by supernatural powers. Like, you know what I mean? Like this we should be ticked off a little bit, or how can I say, like, look at this, like, wow, this isn't right. And, that's why I think it's important that we let Scripture speak, and Jesus himself specifically help us parse out the reality of evil. Famously, John Walton, a scholar who I do respect and have some of his books here on my shelves, he and Heiser offer different perspectives on how to parse out the reality of evil that the Bible calls us to hold. Heiser, obviously, like you, believed, and myself, in a literal council that rebelled in actual space and time. While Walton, he wrote a book with his son entitled Demons and Spirits in Biblical Theology. And in this book, they equate the divine council worldview with, like, flat earth and the three-tiered cosmos, and say that God was accommodating culture with the reality of evil and the divine council worldview, and that those aren't a part of our actual reality. Heiser has an epic episode of Naked Bible where he responds to this book and Walton at length. And we have a clip right here. So for context, I want to watch this short clip of Walton responding to Heiser's critique, and then I want to hear you discuss what we can learn from this.
With regard to Mike Heiser, Mike and I were friends, and we had many conversations over the years. We agreed on lots of points of methodology in terms of the importance of the ancient Near East and reading it in light of its culture. We were in agreement with that. But we also had many disagreements about where you go from there and what conclusions could be drawn with regard to various texts. So, for instance, he believed that since the text spoke about a divine council, that there must be one. And for me, that's just like solid sky, or like Platonic ideas of body and soul. Just because the Bible speaks about it, that could be reference, not affirmation. And in that podcast, I was really very confused because Michael didn't seem to grasp this distinction between reference and affirmation, which I was surprised at. There were many times in his podcast where he said, "I don't understand how Walton could say that," or "What does Walton do with XYZ passage?" So I was really confused by it, that he came out the way that he did. So he chose to speak publicly from his admitted lack of understanding instead of asking me for clarification, and that was disappointing. So I felt like he really didn't understand what we were doing, but he didn't invite me onto the podcast to have a conversation about it. So I didn't have that chance to interact with him.
First thing I want to say is I'm not trying to fuel a fire of division or anything like that. But what I think is that this tension between these two sides, in a sense, is underlying for a lot of people like myself as we try to wrestle with what reality Scripture is actually having us to hold about evil, and like what we just even talked about, like these innocent bystanders, of what we really think about what's going on in our world. I think it's important, and it really hits on it. So before I say another thing, respond to that clip and what we can learn from both Heiser and Walton with these very different views of the Bible.
It's a classic disagreement among two good men. Thank you for that clip. I've met Walton and talked to him. Last time I was at ETS, I had him sign one of the books that he had written. And of course, my question to him is, where do you find time to write this? I mean, you're coming out with a new book every 6 months, and and they're not small, they're major works. And he just laughed and said, well, I love to write, and just couldn't have been more gracious. And so he was, and I think I can mention this in passing too. He was asked to be a contributor, in a work that we were thinking of doing for Mike, and he graciously said, well, time is always a matter for any author, right? Any author. So we always want to respect an author's inability to write for a cause, but he was very gracious in saying, I don't want to come across as agreeing where, we agreed to disagree on some things, and I think that would be just maybe where we should leave it. So that was well said, and so I like what I heard. I hope it's not discomforting to Christians to hear that two Christians don't see eye to eye on academic issues or on the text. I think that's healthy. This is how I'm sure the early church, Paul and Peter, Galatians 2, can look at each other and disagree. And I think that's a strength, not a weakness. I do see both sides. Let me recommend why I think Walton is onto something, because I said it to Mike too, in the quiet of sometimes we room together at ETS, and I remember having these conversations with the lights off, staring up at the ceiling, talking about things. And I said once to Mike, I don't like the word council, divine council. It sounds like a boardroom, where you got the president at the head of the table and people sitting around making decisions and yeas and nays and all this stuff. And really the word council has English overtones to me or connotations in any way that I don't think are necessary, because the same word council can also just mean assembly. So why don't we just go with a divine assembly idea? Or, this is where I've landed after all these years, a plural Elohim view. In other words, if I say divine council, there's all sorts of, connotations that go with it. Yeah. But if I just say a plural Elohim worldview, well, now usually a person will say, well, what's an Elohim and what do you mean? And that's where I say, okay, good, let me explain that. So I would recommend that Walton's onto something when he says, let's make sure we understand the difference between referent and affirmation. We can refer to a flat earth in the Old Testament, but we don't have to affirm it, right? There's a difference between saying that if it's in the Bible, that must mean it's, quote, true. We'd get into trouble, as we all know, right off the bat, because there are a lot of ideas like a flat earth and such that we don't want to pull into our modern thinking. So the obvious question that many people ask is, well, why would I believe in a divine council if I don't believe in a flat earth? My quick answer is this. Okay, number one, don't call it a council, just call it a group of plural Elohim that exist. And if that's the case, follow the trajectory of the biblical narrative and ask yourself this question. At any point during the story of the Bible, and I'm talking Genesis to Revelation, does anyone stop and say other gods don't exist? And I'd say no. And the best example for me is Paul and the principalities and powers. Why would Paul be so, 6 times list these beings as the primary enemy of the Christian? He doesn't call them angels, and that's very key. He's not thinking in terms of messenger deities. He's thinking in terms of authority deities, and that's exactly what these gods were. So I think the quick answer that I would say, if I had Walton on my right and Heiser on my left, I would say, you guys agree, I trust, that real spiritual powers exist. Now, what you want to call those, let's have the conversation, but that's where I think they could agree, and it's unfortunate that maybe words and definitions got in the way.
Did you ever read that book from Walton?
I did not.
Yeah.
Demons
So
and Spirits, I'd have to check and see if I even have it.
yeah. So what
When did
about
that come out?
another question? It would be, and whatever. I'm not putting you on the spot. It's just for context reasons. Have you ever listened to that Naked Bible podcast where he reviews that
No,
book?
not that one.
So yeah, I would recommend it to really understand this divide. And when I say divide, I'm not trying to divide two humans. I'm trying to understand two ways of thinking about the scriptures. Okay, and within that work, and I did a deep dive into that book. Not only the book, but like a 3-hour teaching that Walton had online on YouTube that I went through, because it's hitting a nerve of a very important topic for a lot of us that are digesting this. How do we see the reality of evil in our world? And Walton's book, he puts the understanding of demons that can inhabit people and cause pain and inflict whatever as the same way of viewing as flat Earth. Like I said, that's not real.
Does he believe in angels?
Again, I'm not going to put words into his mouth. What I'm going to say is, from the research that I did into the book and the teachings that I found online and listening to the Naked Bible podcast from Mike, I would say that Walton toes a very dangerous line when discerning between reference and affirmation of how he chooses what is reference or affirmation. And that's the whole point of like what, my next question, and I'll ask you, like how we personally parse out what the scriptures are calling us to hold as a reality to evil. Personally, I use Jesus, right? Because I'm a Christian.
Yeah.
I follow Jesus. So if this is the guy I'm going to follow, I'm going to let him dictate how I view the reality of the Hebrew scriptures that he came to fulfill. And, we're going to have one more clip that's going to mention some of these things. But tell me how you do that. Does that make sense to you with what I said about Jesus helping me parse that out? Or how do you do that for yourself through scripture?
It does, yeah. So I love John 11 because the question of resurrection is, very shadowy through the Old Testament. You're not quite sure what these people believed about the afterlife. Then you come to John 11, Lazarus has died, and Martha says, after Jesus says he'll rise again, Martha says, I know he'll rise at the resurrection, or something like that. He'll live again. And Jesus basically says, yes. In other words, we have settled with a moment of interaction between he and another person that there is a thing called resurrection in the last day. And so there it's settled. John 11 settled resurrection for me because Jesus said it. And those kind of things, yeah, I like your point. When it comes to Jesus dealing with Satan and the Satan figure, like Matthew 24, the hell is made for the devil and his angels. That kind of stamps approval on my radar, that Jesus does see a host with a leader of evil beings that will someday be punished for what they did. So those kinds of things to me are key, and I'm glad you brought it up. Yeah.
And I mean, what we referenced earlier, even with the Lord's Prayer, it's something that struck me like a lightning bolt about a year ago, is that Jesus taught us to daily pray, and our instruction to pray, to be delivered from evil. That means that we are under evil. You know what I mean? Like, if we have to be delivered from it, that means that we are on earth waiting for heaven to come here to fully dwell with us. That what that's going to solve when heaven comes to dwell on earth as it is when we have that connection, when Jesus comes back again, that's what's going to deliver us from evil. And, that parses out the reality for me. And I think it's important. So we'll move on from that Walton thing. But, I'm definitely interested in exploring that more. And I'd love for you to even look into it, because it's not that I want to form, some great divide. But I think two intelligent scholars like you, yourself, and Walton working through something like this would be a very informative and how can I say this? What you talked about, wanting to get this onto the front page, that'd be, I think, a good step in that. So I want you to consider that. Put that just as like a little side note in your brain right there. So moving on, Tim Mackie is not only the leader of the Bible Project, but he's a huge hero of mine. He's the one who actually introduced me to Heiser. Some people find Mackie through Heiser, but vice versa. Mackie introduced me to Heiser and the Unseen Realm. So let's cut to this clip of him going. This is like I planned it. This is perfect follow for our discussion. Let's cut over this clip of him talking about how Jesus brings confirmation to the reality of evil and these divine rebellion.
Another key part of what both 2 Peter and Jude are doing is they are informed by Second Temple Jewish conversations happening about these things. And specifically, we know where one of the sources of these ideas is. It's in a text that Jude quotes from, called scholars call it First Enoch. And so what First Enoch and other Jewish literature of the period tells us is the way that they understood the flood narrative was that the flood was where God thoroughly punished and destroyed the Nephilim and chained their souls or spirits in the underworld, but that the Satan, the snake figure, is on the loose, and he has certain minions from that crew who go about doing their work. This is why when Jesus meets that guy in the graveyard and he says, "What is your name?" And then what do they answer back to him?
Legion.
We're Legion. We're Nephilim. They're warriors. They're Nephilim. They're the spirits of the Nephilim. And the point of the Gospel is about Jesus is that he is the one who has authority over heaven and earth and over these creatures, which is why when he meets all of these spirits and demons, what they beg him not to do is don't destroy us yet, because they know that Jesus has control over their existence. They're just asking him not, to take control yet, or not to destroy them yet. The whole point is this leading us to Jesus, as he is the human in whom divine and human, image of God, image of man, heaven and earth meet together in one person. And so the stories about him being tested in the wilderness is about he is the anti-Cain. And he's the anti-Nephilim, and he defeats the tester in the wilderness, and then he's going to go on to do everything he's going to do. But the point is that Jesus sees himself stepping into this drama between this battle of two realms, and that explains all of his exorcisms and why that was such a big deal to him. That used to just strike me as kind of cool, but also weird about Jesus, is that he was exorcism was such a big deal for him. But if you fit him into this story, with this view of the cosmos from Genesis 1, it makes perfect sense why Jesus is going around doing what he's doing, and makes perfect sense of why the Apostle Paul wants to invite us as followers of Jesus to see that these two realms are very much still in operation.
So first, before I say anything, respond to that clip. What'd you think?
Love it. And I just want the listener to also, in other words, when I hear that, I say, well, Jesus is anti-Nephilim, yes, but he's also anti-gods of the first commandment. And as long as people connect those two dots together, that's my concern. So that when the demon says to Jesus, "Are you come to destroy us?" and he quotes or uses the same Greek word that's used in Jeremiah 10:11, Septuagint, for destroy, that these gods will be destroyed. I'm being asked to connect not just the Nephilim of Genesis 6 to Mark 1. I'm being asked to connect the entire biblical Old Testament narrative of the gods of Canaan and the god of Moab, or the god of Moab and Edom and Ammon and Babylon. That this is and maybe that's what Tim is going after. But yeah. I want it always to connect to that larger picture of Psalm 106, is it 37, where they sacrifice to demons, gods they did not know. That these gods are actual Elohim that are part of the story of every page of the Old Testament, and not just Genesis 6. Does that make sense?
It does. No, I think you're right. I mean, I edited down that clip to put that through, but I think it's important for, like you said, to not just narrow it in on Nephilim or just these few occurrences that Jesus has in the Gospels, but to always keep in mind these rogue rebel Elohim that God appointed to the nations that have now rebelled, that instead of pointing people to Yahweh and to they're drawing them away. Instead of doing their task, they've rebelled, just like we talked about and saw in those other videos.
And could it be another option that we need to test drive all the time, is that when these beings in Genesis 11, 10 and 11 were put in place, some of them maybe had not yet rebelled. is it possible that over time, a being that's in charge of some country went sour? I mean, if we're created in their image, they are made like us. In other words, I'm reading from Genesis 1:26 that I'm like an Elohim, plural. That's how I've been made. God made all the animals to be like this and like that, and like, that's how they reproduced. Then he says, well, let's make man in our image. And I take that to be kind of a reflective statement of, hey, let's make these hairless bipeds that look like monkeys, but actually are like gods. And so they think like gods. They can reason and do things that only the gods can do. In other words, I can talk to my dog, but he doesn't understand me, but I can more talk to God. It's really a bizarre idea when I think of it. I can talk to God easier than I can talk to my dog. And I think that the point of that is that Genesis 1 wants me to understand that my creation, and you got into it when you said, may your kingdom come to earth, that when I pray to heaven in the morning, toward heaven to my Father, I'm asking that kingdom to come here and thus to reflect how I should be thinking the whole day. So I can think like a deity. That's really what it's trying to, say in the end. And that's a bizarre idea. And by the way, I have a good atheist friend who in fact, he's the president of Minnesota Atheists, and we used to debate at college campuses and such. And he was an ex-Roman Catholic, or he is. And so he thinks of all of his anti-Christian argument, anti-theist arguments, basically as just a Catholic kid gone sour, and not liking the God that he was taught about. And I often found that what frustrated him more, not that I was trying to frustrate him, but when it comes to an argument, it's not the weird parts of the Bible that get an atheist frustrated. It's the bigger picture. It's just it's the grand narrative of all the Bible that really an atheist doesn't like. And that is that not only is there a God, there are humans that have been created to be like gods, and that we're part of a society that's meant to interact with a world that we can't see. Now, again, to them, that sounds weird. To us, it's just a normal read on the Bible. And I found he always wanted to get down into the gravel of the Bible, that there's problems in this text and textual issues and that kind of stuff. And I always wanted to stay away from that and say, in so many words, what really we need to talk about is the big difference between our two worldviews. That we simply are talking, is there a mind behind the creation, or is there matter? And if we have a mind, how do we as humans reflect with that mind, stuff like that. So again, the democratization of this worldview to me gets out of the weird stuff and more into so what are we trying to argue for here in the end, when it comes to even as Tim was doing beautifully, he's tying it all to Jesus in the end. And I think that's where a Christian needs to go, is realize in John 151, when Jesus says, you're going to see a ladder of divine messengers coming down on me now. And that's an amazing moment where Jesus is tying this whole concept of the portal of divine and human relationship is now centered on a 6-foot human. Talk about a moment of time that redefines everything. So
yeah, no, that's beautiful. And I think it helps us, again, like you just pointed back to what Tim was saying, parse out the reality of everything with what Jesus showed us. And, I love it when Tim said, if we fit Jesus into this divine counsel worldview, all of a sudden Jesus is focused on exorcism and like the supernatural context, all that like makes sense, and it's like
fits so beautifully.
It's like you know it, and I know it. Mike talked about it, like people just skip over this stuff when they're preaching. And like, this is at the forefront, and that's what you guys are about. What this channel is about is helping us, rediscover and do that. So Ron, right now with what we're talking about, something that I'd like to close with is who rules the nations now? And this is something I've interviewed a lot of N.T. Wright, Nijay Gupta, lot of different people that have written books about politics and God's kingdom and us understanding that. So I want to ask you this question: who rules the nations now? How do we parse that out when we look at the empires of today that rule the world? What do we say to that?
Great question. And I think what I see, again, the trajectory of the Bible is that you come to the Roman Empire and this huge, vast empire that Jesus enters that doesn't have villages that go to war every spring, right? You have a huge empire. Paul is in that empire and he's realizing that the Old Testament model of every city has a God model probably isn't happening anymore. And so he calls it the prince of the power of the air, for 2 Corinthians 4:4, that he see again. What I love about Paul is he doesn't know what he doesn't know, and he doesn't try to make up stuff he doesn't know. So he doesn't get into naming deities and stuff like that. He just, again, talks in terms of very clear, poignant ways of saying rulers and authorities, and they are spirits. Ephesians 6:12 doesn't mince words on that. And I think if you were to ask Paul this question, he would say, I don't know. I have a Roman Empire that the gods are somehow involved in the pantheon of the gods that I go into every city, Ephesus, and the god Artemis and so forth. So I think Paul would have noticed or believed that one being, one Satan figure, shall we say, is in charge, and there are many minions of that being. And he would admit, this is, maybe I'm punting, but here's where I think I need to punt. I don't know how it works on a daily level. I have my suspicions today when as an American, right, I don't see a lot of evidence of spiritual things. That's just not my world here in Minneapolis. But I hear of missionaries, again, who come back from Jamaica or Haiti, and they'll say, or Africa. I just met one at church, and he says, you would not believe how real this is in their world. That the idea that these spirits are very real, and they do various things to show how real they are. I'm sorry, the pastors of churches or the priests in the churches of the Catholic churches do certain things to keep these spirits at bay. I was just talking to one about this. And so what do I do with that? I just say, it's real, but I don't know how it's real. And so I love C.S. Lewis's Screwtape Letters for its modern day possibility that as one, demon's talking to the other, he says, I think for the present purposes, we should keep ourselves rather quiet and how we deal with things. And cards, if cards does the trick, let's just let him get it. Cards or murder can both have the same effect in the end if it keeps them from Jesus, right? So I think if the wastebasket in my office levitated right now, I'd become a better Christian. So Satan doesn't do that. He's smarter than that. My son is into AI stuff. He's 31, and his theory is that Satan, because he does a lot of gaming, and the idea that you can create a game that actually starts to get better than you is, where AI is going. And his theory, and he's very gentle about this, but he loves to give me his theories over a game of tennis. And his latest theory is that Satan is something like an AI model that possibly God's design is that this being can grow in his knowledge so exponentially that, if we can do it with AI, why can't God do it with Satan, is his point. That now what Satan's doing is even beyond what God, well, you don't want to say God couldn't have imagined, but the idea that we are, in our tradition, we think of Satan as a static, stupid, bumbling idiot, that does something and says, oh, rats. Well, what if Satan's a lot smarter than that? So smart, in fact, by God's design, that he's able to think beyond us, even in this conversation. And he can respond to our conversation in such a way that he gets smarter tomorrow because of what we just said right here.
Yeah, but I think what you said is so compelling, because when you think about that, like, the supernatural is not trying to be seen. Jesus, Tim Mackey says it like this, like when Jesus came onto the scene, it's like he electrified it. It's all of a sudden they started coming out of the woodwork and the bushes. And that for the most part, they do try to remain unseen with what they're doing and the influence and chaos that they cause in our world. But that, no matter whether we look at the nations, America, Russia, whatever, the empires that exist out there, no matter who we say rules them, whether it's actual humans or evil supernatural powers, we know that we say to both of them, Jesus is king, and that he has given, he has victory over over these evil supernatural powers, and that he is king of the world. And that's what Paul got into a lot of trouble in Rome and in his time going through saying. And I think that, even as we approach the political tense season that we're in, that we can find peace as Christians, knowing that we don't have to place our faith in a left or a right, that our faith and allegiance is in Jesus, the true king, and that no matter who rules this country, whether it's spiritual evil, whether it's the left, the right, or whoever, we are to proclaim Jesus as king and to live out loving our neighbors as ourselves and loving each other.
Yeah. Amen and amen. That's
so
well said.
I think that's so great to kind of close with. But Ron, before we leave, I wanted to, if you could, we had so much fun going down memory lane, but share us a little bit with the future. Share the direction of the Divine Counsel Worldview podcast, any other awakening or Heiser related news you might have. Tell us something, anything that you want to share before we go.
Two things, I guess. One is that I'm writing, when Mike died, we had talked over the years previous to his illness and death about a systematic theology book. He felt that a good summary of theology, not, Unseen Realm is topical, but how about a book that's stretches over all the theologies, God, man, sin, salvation, church, all that stuff, from a Divine Counsel worldview. And I agreed. I just didn't have the time at that point. I was pastoring and teaching at the time. And so when he got ill, Drina, and when he died, actually, Drina sent me 72 pages of the beginning of the book he had written. And Mike was so productive, just incredible.
Yeah.
Here he was ill and he was writing this theology book. So she sent it to me and said, "Can you finish it? Can you take it from there?" And I said, "Absolutely." So that's become my burden since Mike's passing, is the writing of a systematic theology textbook. So I'm having fun with it. It's going to be about 600 pages, and it's going to handle all the topics, again, of a standard theology book. It's going to, major on the majors, minor on the minors, as we'd like to say. Would you mind if I advertised to anyone that's listening how they can participate in this? Because I'm finding this to be a great part of it. Is if anyone wants to say yes to this offer, just email me at my personal email, and I'll send you what I've done so far. And even as I write chapters, I like to send it out, kind of, people source this out and have people respond and say, "Hey, you're missing this, or this doesn't make sense," because I want this to be a well done book that again democratizes the worldview for everyone. And so if I could give my email, would that be okay?
If you want, I'll have it in the notes too.
Yeah, it's RONNJOHNSON. It's just my name, Ronn Johnson, the number 7 at gmail.com. And if you just say, "I'd love to help you edit the theology book you're writing," I'll send you about every month. I'll just send you, what I'm writing on for that month. And I'm going to be done with it by March of 2025. So that's my agreed upon time to be done with Trina's help. So
yeah, if you don't mind that email going out to 30,000 people, that's
absolutely.
Yeah, no, I'll put it in the notes.
I've had about 25 people respond so far, and I haven't said it to a lot of people. But
man, I love that. We'd love. I personally, I'm gonna email you and tell you that I'd love to see that.
And I would love to get your responses to things and say, I don't see why this is part of a Divine Counsel worldview or something like that. So those sorts of things. So
we got the documentary coming up that we're working on with Reuben Evans and Visual First Films, and I'm really excited about that. And I appreciate you saying that you'll be a part of that. I was just curious, can you tell us what you think about a Heiser documentary and why you think it's important for us to keep the teachings and legacy of Dr. Michael Heiser alive?
Because with his passing, I think it's God. I've asked God this many times. Why Mike? Right? Mike was a combination of a gravel inspector and a road surveyor. I mean, he could look up and see where it was going, or he could get down into the dirt and the Ugaritic of this and the Sumerian of that. He had the amazing ability to do both. So what he has done in his passing, shall we say, is handed off to you and I and people that I think what we can do that Mike didn't have time for, like I've said at the very beginning, is democratize this and say it's not just weird parts of the Bible that are important, as Mike used to say. It's every page of your Bible has something to do with a which God question. And it gets into justification issues. It gets into atonement issues. It gets into every major doctrine of the Bible. So our job from what Mike has left us is to start attaching how a plural Elohim worldview fits all the stories that we read and turn it into children's stories. Bible Project does a great job of that, but turn this into something that can be done every week in church, not because, again, we have to talk about the gods as though they're the most important thing. They're not, but Jesus is, and how he fits the story of those gods, to me, is where everything goes. And I guess I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited for the documentary. I'm excited to keep talking with you and others. And, I hope you'll come back and talk to us again. I feel like we're just scratching the surface here. You've been so amazing. It's been a true pleasure to be on here with you today at Ring Them Bells. We are a huge fan of yours, and we're going to continue to champion your work and point as many people as we can to all the awesome things that you guys are all doing at Awakening and the Divine Counsel Worldview podcast. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today, Ron.
You're very, very kind. It's very humbling to be a part of this. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, at Ring Them Bells, we believe in the power of prayer. Before we go, will you close us out in a word of prayer and maybe specifically include a prayer for this documentary and channel? Coming from you, it will mean a lot.
Yeah, let's do it. Father, thank you that we get to be in league with the king of the whole world. That's just an amazing thought that we can begin our day by knowing that we are doing right simply by being loyal to Jesus and his position in the heavens. And I pray for each of us and our listeners that they make that a reality every day and enjoy it, just relish in it, and even find peace in it. And for the documentary to follow and all the parts that are being, again, put together, we wonder every day, I do, why Mike is not here. And we know there's a reason for it, but may we find out in the final version of history that you were in charge of every moment, including where we stand today. So we give you this podcast and give you the days ahead in Jesus' name and for his sake. Amen.
Amen to all of that, Ron. Thank you so much for being here with us, brother. We are done.
Wow. How incredible is this? I hope you guys are enjoying this, and I hope you're learning a lot. I want to ask you for a second to subscribe. If you're enjoying the content, share it, press that like button, slap it. Help this channel grow. Help the message of the good news of what Jesus has done for this world get out. You're a part of this community with me. I always say we, and really it's just me behind the camera. But I've got you guys as support, encouragement, and you're here for the ride, and I'm so grateful for you. So thank you for subscribing, thank you for liking, thank you for sharing the content, and thank you for being a part of this journey with me. Let's get back to ringing them bells.